I thought I had arrived in paradise when I bought that cabin in the mountains. It was my sanctuary, my reward after decades of hard work, of unseen sacrifices, of sleepless nights, building something I could finally call mine. That place represented everything I had ever dreamed of: peace, quiet, the sound of the wind through the pine trees, and the freedom of not having to explain anything to anyone. I had worked my whole life for it. Every dollar invested there carried the weight of my tired hands, my aching knees, and my back that was no longer the same. But it was mine. Only mine. That Friday afternoon, I decided to drive up without giving notice. I needed to escape the city noise, the endless obligations, the phone calls that always seemed to ask for something more. Robert, my son, had been distant these last few weeks. His texts were short, evasive. Sharon, his wife, wouldn't even answer when I tried to reach her. But I didn't want to dwell on it too much. I just wanted to get to my cabin, light the fireplace, make a cup of tea, and look at the mountains until my soul could breathe again. The dirt road crunched under the tires of my SUV. It had rained the previous days, and everything smelled of wet earth and fresh pine. That aroma always comforted me. It always reminded me that there were places in the world where I could still be myself, without masks, without roles to fill. But when I rounded the last curve before reaching the property, something inside me stopped. There were 3 vehicles parked in front of the entrance. One of them was Robert's car. I didn't immediately recognize the other 2, but I knew something was wrong. My heart started beating faster. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was an intuition I had learned not to ignore after so many years of living. I parked a few yards away and stayed seated in the car for a few seconds, trying to understand what was happening. No one had asked me permission to use the cabin. No one had told me they were coming. In fact, the last time I spoke to Robert, he was in the city busy with his job. Oh, that's what he told me. I got out of the car slowly. My legs were shaking a little, not from weakness, but from contained anger. I walked toward the main door, and before I could ring the doorbell, I heard laughter. Loud laughter, celebrating, music. My blood ran cold. I opened the door without knocking. It was my house. I didn't have to ask permission to enter what was mine. The first thing I saw was the living room completely transformed. My furniture was still there, but everything else had changed. The photographs I had hung with so much care, the pictures of my parents, my grandparents, of Robert as a child, all of them had been removed. In their place were new pictures, decorations I didn't recognize, objects that clearly weren't mine. On the dining room table there were open wine bottles, plates of food, dirty glasses. The fireplace was lit. Someone had turned my sanctuary into their own private party. Sharon was the first to see me. She was sitting on my favorite couch, the one I had bought after months of searching for the right one, with a glass of wine in her hand and an expression of complete comfort. When our eyes met, her face changed. What I saw wasn't surprise. It was annoyance, vexation, as if I were an unwanted interruption to her perfect afternoon. She stood up slowly, setting the glass on the table with a sharp thud that made everyone in the room turn to look at me. Robert was sitting near the window. His face went pale when he saw me. Next to him were Joe and Lucy, Sharon's parents, 2 people I barely knew, but who were now sitting in my living room as if they owned the place. Sharon crossed her arms and walked toward me. Her gaze was pure ice, barely contained disdain. There was no greeting, no explanation, only a question loaded with venom. "What do you want here, you old trespasser?" The silence that followed was so heavy you could have cut it with a knife. No one moved. No one breathed. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for my reaction, waiting for me to break, to apologize, to back down as I probably had so many times before. But something inside me had finally shattered at that moment. It wasn't just the invasion of my property, it was the total lack of respect, the audacity to treat me as if I were the one in the wrong, as if I didn't have the right to be in the place I had bought with my own money, with my own effort. Sharon continued, her voice rising in volume, full of an unfounded confidence. "I'm going to call the police," she said. "You can't just walk into private property like this without permission. This is trespassing." I felt a strange calm take over me. It wasn't resignation. It was absolute clarity. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what to do. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg them to explain. I was just going to stay. I was just going to watch as their little world of lies began to crumble. I smiled. It was a small, controlled smile, but Sharon saw it, and something in her expression changed. She had expected screams, tears, perhaps an embarrassed retreat. But not this. Not this calm. "Go ahead," I said in a firm, clear voice. "Call the police if you have the nerve." I walked slowly toward the couch opposite hers and sat down. I clasped my hands in my lap and looked at all of them, one by one. Robert avoided my gaze. Joe and Lucy exchanged nervous glances. Sharon was still standing, phone already in her hand, but her finger had stopped over the screen. Something in my attitude had thrown her off. I sat there, in my own house, surrounded by people who had invaded my space, who had lied, who had acted as if I didn't exist. But I no longer felt fear. I no longer felt doubt. I only felt a cold, absolute determination. I was going to reclaim what was mine. I was going to watch as each of them faced the consequences of their actions. And I was going to do it without raising my voice, without losing my composure. Because true strength doesn't shout. True strength waits. And I had waited long enough. Sharon was still standing in front of me, phone in hand, but her fingers weren't moving. I could see the confusion in her eyes, the thinly veiled anger of someone who expected a different reaction. She had bet that I would run out, ashamed, apologizing for interrupting their little celebration. But I didn't move. I stayed seated, staring at her, waiting for her to do exactly what she had threatened to do. "You're not going to call?" I asked in a quiet, almost kind voice. "I told you to go ahead. I'm waiting." Robert stood up abruptly. His face was pale, almost grey. I knew that expression. It was the same one he had as a child, when he knew he had done something very wrong. He walked toward Sharon and put a hand on her shoulder, as if trying to stop her, but she roughly shook him off. "I don't need your permission, Robert," she said without taking her eyes off me. "Someone has to set some boundaries here." Joe, Sharon's father, cleared his throat from his place on the couch. He was a heavy-set man, with a deep voice, accustomed to being listened to when he spoke. He got up slowly and walked to stand next to his daughter, as if reinforcing her position. "Mrs. Martin," he said with a condescending tone, as if speaking to a child, "I think there's a misunderstanding here. Robert gave us permission to use the cabin this weekend. He told us you were traveling, that you weren't coming, that there would be no problem. In fact, he assured us that you had authorized this." I felt the blood rush to my head, but I kept my composure. So that was the lie. That was the story they had built to justify their invasion. Not only had they occupied my property without my consent, but they had used my name, invented an authorization I never gave, and manipulated the truth to look good in front of others. "Robert told you that?" I asked, looking directly at my son. "You told them I authorized this?" Robert opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His eyes darted from me to Sharon, from Sharon to her parents, looking for some way out, some way to escape this moment. But there was no escape. The truth was there, naked and cruel, waiting to be acknowledged. Lucy, Sharon's mother, spoke from her seat. She was a thin woman, with a sharp voice, and a perpetual expression of superiority that had bothered me since the first day I met her. "We didn't know you weren't aware," she said with false innocence. "Robert invited us. He said it would be a family weekend, that you would arrive tomorrow, and that we should get everything ready for when you came. We even cleaned the house. See? We went grocery shopping. We brought food, all so you would be comfortable." The lie was so elaborate, so carefully constructed, that it almost seemed credible. Almost. But I knew every corner of this house. I knew exactly how I had left it the last time I was here. And what I saw now was not a house prepared for my arrival. It was an occupied house, transformed, stripped of my presence to make room for theirs. "So Robert lied to you," I said simply, letting the words drop like stones into still water. "Because I never gave any authorization. I never said I was traveling. I never knew you would be here." The silence fell over the room again. But this time it was different. This time there was discomfort, nervousness. Joe and Lucy exchanged glances. Sharon squeezed the phone tighter. Robert still couldn't look me in the eye. "That's not true," Sharon finally said, her voice rising in pitch again. "Robert wouldn't lie about something like that. You must have forgotten. At your age, it's normal for things to get confused, for memory to fail." There it was, the first direct attack, the strategy of making me look like a confused old woman, like someone who couldn't trust her own memories. It was a tactic I had seen before, one I had experienced in small doses over the years. But now I saw it in its rawest, most ruthless form. I stood up slowly, not because I was going to leave, but because I wanted everyone to see me clearly when I said the next thing. "My memory is perfectly fine, Sharon," I said with a clear voice. "I remember every conversation I've had with Robert in the last few weeks. I remember him telling me he was busy with his job. I remember you stopped answering my calls 2 weeks ago, and I perfectly remember that this property is in my name, that I paid every dollar of the mortgage, that I maintained this place, and that no one, absolutely no one, has the right to be here without my explicit permission." I walked slowly toward the wall where my family photographs used to be. The empty frames were still there, but the pictures had been stored or discarded. I ran my hand over one of the frames and turned back to them. "Where are my photographs?" I asked. "Where are the pictures of my parents, my grandparents, of my son when he was little?" No one answered. Sharon looked away. Lucy sat down again, uncomfortable. Joe cleared his throat but didn't say anything. "We stored them," Robert finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "We thought you wanted to refresh the decor. They're in the upstairs closet." "You thought I wanted to refresh the decor?" I repeated, letting the question hang in the air. "Or did you decide that my presence here wasn't necessary? That you could erase me from my own house and replace me with what you preferred?" Sharon finally exploded. Her control broke, and all the anger she had been suppressing surged to the surface. "This is ridiculous. Robert is your son. He has a right to use this house. You're always saying that what is yours is his, that you work to leave him something. And now it turns out we can't even come for a weekend." "You have the right if I give permission," I replied coldly. "You have the right if you ask me. You have the right if you respect the basic rules of coexistence. But sneaking in, lying about my authorization, removing my belongings, and then treating me like a trespasser when I show up on my own property, that is not a right. That is invasion." Sharon took a step toward me, her face red with fury. "You know what? You're right. I am going to call the police. I'm going to tell them there's an agitated woman in our house, that she's causing problems, that we need help. I smiled again, that same calm smile that had unnerved her so much before. Go ahead, I said again. Please do it. In fact, I insist. I think it's exactly what we need here. A third party who can see this situation clearly. And this time, Sharon dialed the number. The sound of the phone dialing broke the tense silence of the room. Sharon had the speaker activated, probably so we could all hear, so I would know she was serious. Her hand trembled slightly, but her expression remained defiant. Robert had sat down again, his head in his hands. Joe and Lucy remained silent, watching the scene as if they were spectators in a theatre. A female voice answered on the other end of the line. Local police, what is your emergency? Sharon took a deep breath before speaking, composing her voice to sound scared, vulnerable. Yes, hello. I need help. There is a woman in our house causing a disturbance. She entered without permission and is threatening us. We are at the mountain cabin, mile marker 18 of the main road. I felt my blood boil, but I stayed calm. Every word that came out of her mouth was a calculated lie. Our house. Entered without permission. Threatening us. All designed to make me look like the aggressor, the troublemaker. Does the person represent an immediate danger? The operator asked. Sharon looked at me with barely contained hatred. I don't know. She is very agitated. She is in her 60s, but she is acting irrationally. We are scared. A unit is on the way. Stay in a safe place and do not confront the person. You can leave the house. Yes, we can try, Sharon replied, cutting the call with exaggerated drama. She turned to the others with a triumphant expression. You heard them. The police are coming. You better leave before they arrive, and this gets worse for you. I sat back down on the couch. I crossed my legs and placed my hands in my lap. I wasn't going to move. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me run away. I'm not going anywhere, I said calmly. In fact, I'm eager to speak with the authorities. I think they will find what I have to show them very interesting. The confidence on Sharon's face wavered for a second. Just a second. But I saw it. Robert lifted his head and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Was it fear? Guilt? Regret? The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. No one spoke. Joe and Lucy whispered to each other occasionally. Sharon paced back and forth across the room, occasionally looking out the window. Robert remained motionless, like a pillar of salt, and I stayed seated, waiting, with a calm that surprised even myself. Finally, we heard the sound of an approaching engine. A patrol car from the local police parked in front of the house. 2 officers got out of the vehicle, an older man of robust build and a young woman carrying a notebook. Sharon ran to the door before they could knock. She flung it open, with an exaggerated expression of relief. Thank you for coming so fast. She's inside. She came in without permission and won't leave. The officers entered cautiously, assessing the situation with trained eyes. The older officer looked at me and then at Sharon. Who is the owner of this property? He asked in a neutral voice. Sharon opened her mouth to answer, but I spoke first. I am, I said, standing up. My name is Alice Martin. This is my property. That's not true, Sharon interrupted immediately. She's my husband's mother. We have permission to be here. She's the one who came in without warning and is causing trouble. The officer looked at me with an expression I had seen many times before. It was the look of someone who had already decided to believe the version of the younger, more convincing person. It was the look that assumed the older woman was confused, that there were probably family misunderstandings, that this was an unimportant domestic issue. Ma'am, he said condescendingly, do you have any documents to prove this property is yours? I smiled. It was the moment I had been waiting for. Yes, officer. I have all the necessary documents. I walked to my purse, which I had left by the door when I entered. I opened it calmly and took out a folder I always carried with me. Inside were the property deeds, the latest property tax payment, the utility bills in my name, and a letter from the bank confirming that the mortgage was completely paid off. I handed the documents to the officer. He reviewed them carefully, flipping through each page, verifying dates and names. His expression began to change. The young female officer came closer to look as well, and they exchanged a significant glance. Everything is in your name, the officer finally confirmed, looking at Sharon with a completely different expression. Mrs. Alice Martin is the sole registered owner of this property. Colour drained from Sharon's face. Joe stood up abruptly. Lucy let out a small gasp. Robert closed his eyes as if he wanted to disappear. But Robert is her son, Sharon stammered. He told us we could be here, that she had given permission. The young officer spoke this time, her voice firm but professional. Ma'am, the fact that he is the owner's son does not give him an automatic right to use the property without her consent. And Mrs. Martin says she never gave that permission. I never gave it, I said in a clear, strong voice. I arrived here expecting to find my house empty, and I found all of them occupying it as if it were theirs. They removed my photographs, brought their things, lied to other relatives saying I had authorized this. And when I showed up, they called me a trespasser and threatened to call the police. Well, here are the police, and here are the documents that prove I'm the one with the right to be here. The older officer turned to Sharon with a serious expression. It is clear that Mrs. Martin did not give permission for you to be here. Sharon looked at Robert desperately, seeking help, but he still couldn't speak. Finally, it was Joe who replied. There was a misunderstanding, he said with a tense voice. Robert invited us. We thought everything was in order. It was not a misunderstanding, I intervened. It was a deliberate lie, and now I want all of you off my property immediately. The young officer took notes in her notebook. The older officer looked at me with an expression that was now respectful. Mrs. Martin, you are within your rights to ask them to vacate your property. Do you wish to file a formal complaint? I looked at each of them. At Sharon, with her mixed rage and fear. At Joe and Lucy, trying to look innocent. At Robert, destroyed by shame. And I felt something break inside me. It wasn't sadness. It was liberation. I want them to leave, I said simply. Now. The older officer nodded gravely and turned to Sharon and the others. You must vacate the property immediately. Mrs. Martin has proven to be the sole legal owner and has requested that you leave. If you do not do so voluntarily, we would have to proceed with a forced eviction. Sharon opened her mouth to protest, but the young officer interrupted her firmly. You can gather your personal belongings now, but you must leave the premises within the next 30 minutes. I saw how reality began to settle on their faces. The public humiliation of being exposed in front of the authorities, of having their lie unmasked so brutally. But that was only the beginning. There was something else I needed to do, something I had been putting off for years out of fear, out of misplaced love, out of that horrible habit of sacrificing myself for those who never valued me. Officer, I said calmly, before they go, there's something else I need to clarify in front of witnesses. Everyone looked at me. Robert lifted his head, his eyes full of a silent plea. He knew what was coming. After all these years, he knew. I went back to my purse and pulled out another folder. This one was thicker, heavier. It contained years of documents, receipts, bank transfers, contracts. I opened it on the dining room table, clearing the glasses and plates that were still there. "Robert," I said, looking directly at him, "how much money have I given you in the last 5 years?" He turned even paler, if that was possible. "Mum, please, answer the question." The silence was deafening. Sharon was looking at him, not understanding what was happening. The officers remained attentive, not intervening, but clearly interested. "I don't know exactly," Robert murmured. "I do know," I said, pulling out a document. $42,000. In the last 5 years, I have transferred $42,000 to you. For the down payment on your house, for your car, for your credit card debts, for the wedding party Sharon wanted, for the trip to Europe you took last year. Sharon took a step back, as if I had slapped her. Joe and Lucy exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Furthermore," I continued, pulling out more papers, "I pay for your car insurance. That is $300 monthly. I also pay Sharon's gym membership, $150 a month. And for the past 2 years, I have been covering the 20% of your mortgage because you couldn't handle the full payments. That's another $800 monthly." I placed each document on the table with surgical precision. Receipts, bank statements, emails where Robert asked me for help again and again. Everything was there, black on white, impossible to deny. "In total," I said, doing the final calculation, "in the last 5 years, I have invested $68,000 in keeping you afloat. And I'm not counting the gifts, the dinners, the clothes, the appliances I bought you when you moved in." My voice was trembling now, not from weakness, but from years of contained frustration finally finding an outlet. "And this is how you repay me: invading my home, lying about me, removing my photographs as if I no longer existed, as if I didn't matter anymore." Robert had tears in his eyes. He stood up and tried to approach me. "Mum, I didn't know Sharon was going to—" "No," I stopped him with a hand. "Don't blame only Sharon. You allowed this. You lied about my authorization. You brought all these people onto my property without asking me. You removed my photographs. You decided my space didn't matter." I turned to the officers, who were now looking at me with a mixture of respect and pity. "I want you to be witnesses to what I am about to say now." I took out my phone and opened my banking application. My hands weren't shaking. They were steady, sure, determined. "As of this moment, I am cancelling all automatic transfers in the name of Robert Martin. I am cancelling the payment for his car insurance. I am cancelling the monthly contribution to your mortgage. I am cancelling Sharon's gym payment." I pressed button after button, confirming each cancellation. Sharon watched the scene with growing horror. Joe had stood up, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what he was witnessing. "Mum, wait," Robert pleaded. "We can talk about this. We can fix it." "There's nothing to fix," I replied without looking up from the phone. "For years I have fixed your problems. I have paid your debts. I have covered your mistakes. And I did it because I loved you. Because you were my son. Because I thought it was my duty to support you. But I confused support with enabling. I confused love with being used." I finished the cancellations and put the phone away. Then I took another document from the folder. "The car you drive, Robert, is in my name because I put down the deposit, and I am the co-signer on the loan. If you stop paying, they come after me. So I am also going to speak with the bank this very week to remove my name from that contract. If you cannot assume the full payment, you will have to return it." "You can't do that," Sharon finally screamed. "That's our car. We need it for work." "You should have thought about that before," I said coldly. "Before you invaded my house. Before you disrespected me. before you assumed I would always be there to bail you out, regardless of how you treated me. Lucy spoke for the first time in several minutes, her sharp voice full of indignation. This is cruelty. They are your family. How can you be so hard on your own son? I turned to her with a calm that surprised even myself. Hard? You want to know what's hard, Lucy? Working 60 hours a week for 30 years to give my son a better life. Sacrificing my own dreams to pay for his studies. Going without vacations because every extra dollar went to him. And then discovering that they see me as a bank, as a resource to be exploited, not as a human being who deserves respect and consideration. My voice rose for the first time, charged with years of accumulated pain. You arrived here 3 months ago when Robert and Sharon invited you to live with them because they couldn't afford your rent. And do you know who is subsidizing that generosity? I am. With the $800 monthly I put toward the mortgage, I am paying for you to have a roof over your heads, while you treat me like a trespasser in my own property. Joe opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The truth was too obvious, too brutal to deny. I took the last document from the folder. It was the contract for the house where Robert and Sharon lived. This is the copy of the mortgage agreement. Tomorrow morning I am going to contact the bank and request to remove my monthly contribution. You will have to cover the full payment yourselves. If you can't, the bank will begin foreclosure proceedings in 90 days. The silence that followed my words was absolute. Even the officers seemed uncomfortable with the tension filling the room. Sharon had her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide, as the magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in. Joe and Lucy were pale, motionless as statues. And Robert simply wept in silence, tears running down his cheeks, making no effort to stop them. I put all the documents back into the folder, with slow, deliberate movements. Each paper I folded was a chapter closed, a tie cut, a chain broken. You have 30 minutes to collect your things and leave, I said, looking at the older officer. That is correct, he nodded, consulting his watch. That's right, Mrs. Martin. We will wait outside to ensure the eviction is carried out without incident. The two officers stepped out onto the porch, leaving us a moment of privacy that I hadn't asked for, but which they probably deemed necessary. It was the last chance for the family to say what they had to say, to try one last emotional plea. Robert was the first to move. He approached me with slow, hesitant steps, like a child who knows he has made a terrible mistake and doesn't know how to fix it. Mom, his voice broke. Mom, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I didn't want things to come to this. I thought you wouldn't mind us coming up for a few days. A few days, I repeated without emotion. And the photographs? And the lie that I had given permission? And treating me like a trespasser when I showed up? That was Sharon, he said quickly. She was nervous. She didn't think. No, I interrupted him firmly. Don't blame only her. You were here. You saw how she treated me. You didn't say anything. You didn't defend me. You allowed your wife to call me an old trespasser in my own house, and you sat there without saying a word. He lowered his head, unable to deny the truth of my words. Sharon finally found her voice, but now it sounded different. There was no longer arrogance, no contempt. There was pure panic. Alice, please. You can't leave us like this. How are we going to pay the mortgage? How are we going to keep the car? Robert has to go to work. I have my job. Without the car, we can't. You should have thought about that before, I said with a calm that surprised even me. Before you played with fire. Before you assumed I would always be there to clean up your messes, regardless of how you treated me. Joe attempted a different approach, his voice now soft, almost pleading. Mrs. Martin, I understand you're upset. You have every right. But think about this with a cool head. They are your family. It's Christmas in a few weeks. Do you really want them to spend the holidays on the street? They won't be on the street, I replied. They will be in the house I've been helping to pay for. The house where you live for free thanks to my money. Only now they'll have to pay the full amount of the mortgage. They will have to adjust, make sacrifices, tighten their belts, just like I did for decades. Lucy approached with tears in her eyes, adopting the victim role that had probably worked for her all her life. We are elderly. We are 67 years old. We can't go back to working full time. We depend on Robert and Sharon. If they lose the house, we have nowhere to go. I felt a pang of something in my chest. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't exactly pity. It was the recognition that these people were genuinely scared. But that fear was a consequence of their own decisions, of years of living beyond their means, of assuming someone would always be there to rescue them. Lucy, I said, looking directly at her. I'm also elderly. I am 61 years old, and no one rescues me. No one pays my bills. No one supports me when I'm tired. Everything I have, I built alone, with my own hands, with my own effort. And you came here, to my sanctuary, and turned it into your own without asking me, without respecting me, without even considering that I also deserve peace. I walked to the window and looked outside, where the two officers waited next to their patrol car. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains. Soon it would be night. Soon they would be on the road, driving back to the city in the cold evening. You have 20 minutes, I said without turning around. Start packing. For the next few minutes, I heard the chaos of people hurriedly gathering their things, suitcases being zipped, objects being stuffed into bags, quick footsteps going up and down the stairs. No one spoke. Only the sound of urgency, of contained panic, of a world crumbling. Sharon walked past me carrying a large bag. She stopped for a second, as if to say something, but finally just kept walking. Joe and Lucy came down with their belongings, avoiding my gaze. Robert was the last to come down. He carried 2 suitcases, and his face was swollen from crying. He stopped in front of me. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. Mum, is there any way to fix this? Any way you can forgive us? I looked at him for a long moment. I saw the child he had been, the son I had loved more than my own life, but I also saw the man he had become, a man who had learned to take without giving, a man who had confused my love with weakness. Robert, I said softly, forgiveness doesn't come with an attached check. If I can ever forgive you, it will be because you have learned to be responsible for your own life, because you have understood that loving someone doesn't mean using them, because you have grown, but without my help. Without my help, I interrupted him. You will learn what I had to learn alone, that life is hard, that nobody owes you anything, that respect is earned and dignity is protected. You will learn, or you won't learn, but it is no longer my responsibility to teach you. The older officer appeared at the door. Mrs. Martin, are they ready to go? Is there anything else you need? No, officer. Thank you for your help. One by one, they left. Joe and Lucy first, carrying their suitcases toward one of the cars. Sharon followed, head down, defeated. And finally Robert, walking slowly as if his feet weighed tons. Before getting into the car, he turned back one last time toward the house. Our gazes met through the window. I raised my hand in a gesture that was neither a wave nor a goodbye. It was simply acknowledgement that this was happening, that there was no turning back. The engines started. The taillights came on. And slowly the 3 vehicles began to drive away along the dirt road, kicking up dust in the growing darkness. The officers approached one last time. "Are you going to be okay, Mom?" the young officer asked with genuine concern. I smiled, and for the first time in a long time, it was a real smile. "Yes," I said. "I'll be fine." After the officers left, I stood on the porch for a long time, watching the last lights of the vehicles disappear in the distance. The silence of the mountain enveloped me like a warm blanket. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence filled with peace, liberation, and possibilities. For the first time in years, I could hear my own thoughts, without the constant noise of others' demands. I went inside the house and locked the door. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the rush of adrenaline finally beginning to leave my body. I had done something I had been putting off for years. I had said no. I had set boundaries. I had chosen my own dignity over maintaining a false family peace. I walked through the living room, picking up the dirty glasses, the abandoned plates, cleaning up the remnants of the invasion. As I worked, my mind began to wander to the past, to the moments that had led me here, to this breaking point. And I understood that this hadn't started today. It had started many years ago, with small decisions that accumulated until they became a pattern of life. I remembered when Robert was 23 years old and lost his first job. He came to me crying, saying he couldn't pay his rent, that he was going to be evicted. I had just received my first raise in years, a raise I had planned to use to finally take that trip to Europe I had always dreamed of. But I looked into his eyes, saw his desperation, and I gave him the money. $2,000 that meant my vacation, my rest, my moment of reprieve. "It's only this time, Mum," he had promised me. "I'll pay you back. In 2 months, when I get another job." He never gave me that money back, and I never asked for it. 6 months later came another crisis, a credit card debt that had grown out of control, $5,000. I had just finished paying off the mortgage on my small apartment in the city. For the first time in my life, I didn't have that financial pressure. I could breathe, I could save, I could live without the constant weight of debt. But Robert arrived at my door with bank papers, with threats of lawsuits, with that scared child's face that always melted my defenses. "Mum, I don't know how it happened. I spent without realizing. If I don't pay, they'll ruin my credit history. I won't be able to get anything in the future." And I paid. $5,000 of my savings, of the money I had set aside for my retirement, for my future security. "This is the last time," I told him firmly. "You have to learn to manage your money." He nodded seriously. He promised he would change, that he would learn. But a year later, he was back, with another crisis, with another urgent need. I sat on the couch, hugging a cushion to my chest, and the tears finally came. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation, of years of contained frustration at finally finding an outlet. I cried for all the dreams I had postponed, for all the trips I never took, for all the times I denied myself something small to be able to give something big to someone else. I cried for the woman I had been, the one who always said yes, the one who confused love with infinite sacrifice. And I also cried with relief because that woman had finally found her voice, her limit, her dignity. I remembered when Robert met Sharon. From the first moment, I knew there was something about her that unsettled me. It wasn't just her distant attitude or her way of talking as if the world owed her something. It was the way she looked at things, calculating values, measuring possibilities. When they got engaged, Sharon had insisted on a big, elegant, expensive wedding. "It's the most important day of my life," she had said with those bright eyes. "I'm only getting married once." The wedding cost $23,000. Robert and Sharon put in $5,000. Sharon's father put in $3,000, and I, who had promised to contribute $5,000 to help, ended up paying $15,000 because unexpected expenses came up and we couldn't cancel the contracts. $15,000 that represented 2 years of careful saving. $15,000 that I had planned to use to buy this cabin in the mountains. I had to wait 3 more years, working overtime, denying myself basic pleasures, to finally be able to make the down payment on this property. And here they were, years later, occupying this place that I had bought with so much sacrifice, treating it as if it meant nothing, as if it was simply another resource available for their use. I got up and went upstairs to the master bedroom. I opened the closet where Robert had said they stored my photographs. There they were, carelessly piled up in cardboard boxes. I took them out one by one and placed them on the bed. My mother smiling in her garden, my father in his work uniform, my grandparents on their 50th wedding anniversary, and Robert, my little Robert, at 5 years old, riding his first bicycle. I held that photograph in my hands and looked at it for a long time. He was such a happy child then, so innocent. At what point had he lost that sparkle in his eyes? At what point had he learned that he could take without giving? And how much of that was my fault, for having taught him that I would always be there to rescue him? The question hurt more than I expected. Because part of this, a part I didn't want to admit, was my responsibility. I had raised a son who didn't know how to face consequences, who didn't know the real value of money because he had never had to fight for it, who assumed that love meant the infinite availability of resources. But I also understood, sitting there in that quiet room, that it wasn't too late to teach him the most important lesson. Not with words, not with sermons, but with actions. By letting him fall, by allowing him to face reality, by withdrawing the safety net I had so carefully woven all these years. I went downstairs with the photographs and began to hang them back in their original places. Each frame I hung was an act of recovery, of my space, of my history, of my identity that I had allowed to be erased so easily. When I finished, the living room looked as it should look, like my living room, with my memories, with my history imprinted on those walls. It was no longer a generic space that anyone could occupy and transform. It was my home. I lit the fireplace and made myself a cup of tea. I sat down in front of the fire and let the warmth penetrate my tired bones. It had been an exhausting, emotional, devastating day in many ways, but it had also been liberating. I took out my phone and checked the confirmations of all the cancellations I had made. Robert's car insurance, cancelled. The monthly contribution to his mortgage, cancelled. Sharon's gym payment, cancelled. Each notification was a reminder that I had done it, that I had taken the step, that there was no turning back. My phone vibrated with a message. It was from Robert. "Mum, we made it home. Please reconsider. We can't do this without your help. I beg you." I looked at the message for a long time. My fingers moved over the keyboard, writing and deleting responses over and over. Finally, I wrote something simple. "Robert, I love you. But love doesn't mean allowing you to disrespect me. Learn to live within your means. Learn to value what you have. Learn to be responsible. When you do that, we can talk." I sent the message, and then, with a determined movement, I blocked his number. The first 3 days at the cabin were of absolute silence. I received no calls. I had no messages. There were no attempts at contact. It was as if I had cut a cord that connected me to a world of constant demands, and now I simply floated in space, free but also strangely alone. I spent the mornings walking in the woods around the property, watching the light filter through the pine trees listening to the birds sing as if celebrating my presence. In the afternoons, I read books I had bought years ago and never had time to open. I cooked simple food just for myself, without having to worry about anyone else's tastes. I slept deeply, without sudden awakenings, without that nocturnal anxiety that had been my companion for so long. It was peace, it was freedom. But there were also moments when doubt crept through the cracks in my determination. On the fourth day, I decided to return to the city. I had things to resolve, promises to keep. I couldn't hide in the mountains forever, as tempting as it was. As I drove back, I mentally rehearsed the conversations I would have to have with the bank, with the insurance company, with the lawyers, if necessary. I arrived at my apartment in the city at noon. The answering machine was blinking with 15 new messages. I listened to them all while making coffee. 3 were from Sharon, each one more desperate than the last. 4 were from unknown numbers that were probably Joe and Lucy trying to communicate from other phones. 5 were from family friends, clearly contacted by Robert to intercede. And 3 were from the bank. I started with the bank. I called the number they had left, and a representative answered. "Vicente, Mrs. Martin," he said. "We're calling because we noticed you cancelled your monthly automatic transfer. We wanted to confirm if this was intentional or if there was an error in the system." "It was completely intentional," I replied firmly. "I want to remove my monthly contribution to my son's mortgage, and I also need to talk about removing my name as co-signer on his car loan." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear rapid typing. "I understand. Regarding the car, your son would have to refinance the loan without you as a co-signer, which would require him to qualify on his own. Do you want us to send the necessary documentation?" "Yes, please. And regarding the mortgage, without your monthly contribution, the payment would increase by $800. Is your son aware of this change?" "He is aware," I said, although I didn't know if he had really processed the magnitude of what it meant. "He will have to find a way to cover the full amount." "Very well, we will process the changes. Just to inform you, if there were 3 consecutive missed payments, the bank would initiate foreclosure proceedings." "I understand. Thank you for the information." I hung up and stared at the phone. 3 months. Robert had 3 months to find $800 extra each month. It was possible, if they reduced expenses, if Sharon worked more hours, if they stopped living beyond their means. But it would require sacrifice, discipline, maturity. The phone rang almost immediately. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I decided to answer. "Alice?" It was Lucy's voice, trembling, pleading. "Please, don't hang up. I need to talk to you." I took a deep breath. "What do you want, Lucy?" "I came to the bank this morning with Robert. They told us you cancelled everything. The car insurance, your part of the mortgage." "Alice, we can't afford all that. Robert earns $1,800 a month. The full mortgage is $1,400. The car insurance is $300. The bills for electricity, water, and internet are another $250. How are we going to live on $150 a month?" I did the math quickly in my head. The numbers didn't add up. "Lucy, if Robert earns $1,800 and the full mortgage is $1,400, that leaves $400, not $150. "But the car insurance that you were paying," I interrupted her. "If you can't pay for it, then you can't have the car. It's that simple. Sell the car, buy something cheaper that you can maintain, use public transport, look for alternatives. But it's no longer my problem." "Sharon also works," Lucy continued quickly. "She earns $900 a month. That gives us $2,700 in total." "Then you have enough," I said, calculating. $1,400 for the mortgage, $300 for insurance if you decide to keep the car, $250 for utilities. That's $1,950. That leaves you $750 for food, gas, and other expenses. It's tight, but it's possible. But we also live there, Lucy said, her voice going up an octave. Joe and I need to eat. We need our medications. Joe has to go to the doctor every month. That costs $120 because we don't have insurance. And there was the real reason the numbers weren't working. It wasn't just Robert and Sharon. It was 4 adults living on the income of 2, and one of them had significant medical expenses. Lucy, how old are you and Joe? 67. And neither of us works. Joe had a heart attack 2 years ago. He can't work, and I take care of him. I felt a twinge of something akin to compassion, but I kept it at bay. This wasn't cruelty on my part. It was reality. Lucy, understand something. I am also close to 70. I also have medical expenses. I also get tired. The difference is that I worked my whole life to secure my future. I saved, I invested, I prepared. And now that I could finally rest, I discovered I was supporting 6 people besides myself. But we're family. Being family doesn't mean I have to sacrifice my financial security for yours, I said firmly, especially after how you treated me. You invaded my property, you disrespected me, you called me a trespasser, and now you want me to keep paying your bills. There was silence on the other side. Then I heard sobbing. I don't know what we're going to do, Lucy cried. We have nowhere to go. We don't have any savings. If Robert loses the house, we'll be on the street. Then Robert needs to find a second job, I said without emotion. Sharon, too. You need to apply for government medical assistance for Joe. You need to look for cheaper apartments, places you can afford with your real income. You need to live within your means, like millions of people do every day. But there are no buts, Lucy. I made my decision. You now have to make yours. I sincerely wish you the best. But I am no longer your solution. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were trembling. Not from doubt, but from the intensity of maintaining my position against years of conditioning that screamed at me to give in, to help, to sacrifice myself one more time. 2 hours later, I received a text message from an unknown number. It was from Sharon. The insurance company called. They cancelled the car policy. Now we can't drive it legally. Robert can't go to work. You're going to be responsible when he loses his job because of you, I replied briefly. You can take the bus. You can look for alternatives. I am no longer responsible for the consequences of your decisions. The next day, I personally went to the bank where they had the car loan. I filled out all the necessary forms to remove my name as co-signer. The representative explained that Robert would have 30 days to refinance or return the vehicle. Are you sure about this? The employee, a young man in his 30s, asked me. It's a process that cannot be easily reversed. I am completely sure. I left the bank feeling lighter than I had in years. Every document signed was a weight off my shoulders. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks in which I remained firm in my silence, in my decision, in my newly established boundaries. I had returned to the cabin after resolving all the matters in the city. I needed that sanctuary more than ever. The mornings were cold now, with that late October temperature that announced the arrival of winter. I woke up early, made a coffee, and sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun paint the mountains in golden and pink hues. I had managed not to check my phone obsessively. I kept it on silent most of the day, checking it only at night. Messages kept coming, but less frequently. 3 from Robert, automatically blocked. 2 from unknown numbers that I deleted without reading. 1 from a distant cousin asking if it was true that I had thrown Robert out on the street, clearly fueled by distorted versions of the facts. But that Friday afternoon, when I checked the phone before making dinner, there were 15 missed calls, all from the same unknown number, and 3 voicemails. Something in my stomach tightened. 15 calls in one day was not normal, not even in the middle of a family crisis. I took a deep breath and listened to the first message. It was Robert. His voice sounded broken, barely recognizable amidst the sobs. "Mom, please, please answer. I need to talk to you. Everything is falling apart. Everything. Please." The second message was 2 hours later. This time his voice sounded different. Not desperate, but defeated. "Mum, I lost my job. I was fired today. I was late 3 times this week because the bus doesn't arrive on time, and my boss said he couldn't tolerate it anymore. Without the car, I can't be punctual. And now I have no way to pay for anything. Nothing." The third message was from only 30 minutes ago, and it wasn't Robert speaking. "Mrs. Martin, this is Joe." His voice sounded tired, old. "I need you to know what is happening here. Robert and Sharon have been fighting non-stop for 3 days. She blames him for losing his job. She blames him for the gym expenses and going out with friends. They both blame us for living here. Last night, Sharon yelled at him that she didn't sign up to support his elderly in-laws. Robert replied that her parents don't contribute anything either. "We are destroying ourselves." He paused, and I heard his labored breathing. "My wife hasn't stopped crying in 2 days. I can't sleep because of the chest pain. The shouting doesn't stop. The bank called yesterday, saying the first mortgage payment is overdue. Sharon is looking for cheap apartments for Joe and me to move into, but with my condition, no one wants to rent to us. And now Robert is talking about declaring bankruptcy." I closed my eyes and let the phone fall onto my lap. The image Joe painted was one of total collapse, of a system that had worked precariously thanks to my financial support, and that now, without that support, was falling apart in the most destructive way possible. Part of me, the part that had been a mother for 61 years, wanted to grab the phone and call. I wanted to say that everything would be okay, that we would find a solution, that I would fix this as I had always fixed everything. That part hurt me physically, as if claws were digging into my chest. But there was another part, newer but also stronger, that knew this was exactly what had to happen. That this pain, this chaos, was the price of years of irresponsibility. And that if I intervened now, if I rescued the situation one more time, I would only be postponing this inevitable moment. I would only be guaranteeing that in 5 years, or 10, we would be in exactly the same place. The phone vibrated in my hand. Another text message. "Mum, it's me. I know you blocked my number, but Sharon let me use hers. Please, just listen to me. I'm not asking you for money. I just need advice. I don't know what to do. The bank gave me 15 days to pay or start foreclosure. I don't have a job. Sharon is looking for a second job, but it takes time. Her parents have nowhere to go, and she told me this morning that if I don't resolve this, she is going to divorce me." I read the message 3 times. "I'm not asking you for money. I just need advice." It was the closest to taking responsibility that I had seen from Robert in years. But was it real? Or was it just another manipulation? Another way to open the door to eventually ask for exactly what he said he wasn't asking for? I didn't answer. I put the phone away and went for a walk in the woods while there was still light. I needed to clear my mind. I needed fresh air in my lungs. I needed to remember why I had made this decision. When I returned, it had gotten completely dark. I lit the fireplace and made myself a simple dinner. As I ate, the phone rang again. This time I answered without thinking. "Hello?" "Alice. Thank goodness." It was Sharon. Her voice sounded completely different from the last time I had heard it. There was no arrogance, no contempt. There was only exhaustion and defeat. I know I don't have the right to call you. I know I treated you horribly. But I need you to know something. I waited without saying anything. You were right, Sharon continued, her voice breaking. You were right about everything. We were living beyond our means. We spent without thinking because we knew you would always be there to rescue us. We used you. We disrespected you. And now we are paying the price. I remained silent. My parents are moving out in 3 days. We found a room in a shared house that agreed to rent to them despite my dad's condition. It costs $400 a month, and it's horrible, small, in a bad neighborhood, but it's what we can afford. I got a second job cleaning houses at night. Robert is looking for anything, whatever. And we submitted the application for government medical assistance for my dad. She paused, and I heard her breathe deeply. I'm not calling to ask you for money, she finally said. I'm calling because I need you to know that I understand. I understand why you did it. And even though it hurts, even though I'm terrified, I know it's what we needed. A reality check. And Robert? I finally asked, my voice sounding strange after the long silence. He understands too. Sharon let out a bitter laugh. Robert is devastated. He won't stop crying. He says he failed you, that he failed as a son, as a husband, as a man. I think this is the first time in his life that he is really facing the consequences of his actions without having a safety net. Are you going to lose the house? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Probably, unless Robert finds a job in the next few days and we can pay something to the bank to negotiate a payment plan. But even if we manage it, we are going to have to sell the car, cut expenses, live completely differently. There was a long silence. Sharon was breathing on the other end of the line, waiting for me to say something, to offer something. Sharon, I finally said, do you know how much I've worked in my life? No. Since I was 16, 45 years working, 45 years getting up before dawn, coming home after dark, 45 years postponing my dreams to build security, and in the last 5 years, I have given $68,000 to support you. $68,000 that represent years of sacrifice. I know, she whispered, and still you treated me like a trespasser in my own house, as if I didn't matter. I'm sorry. God, I am so sorry. Sorry is not enough, Sharon, I said with a firm but not cruel voice. Sorry is just words. What I need to see are actions, real changes, true responsibility. And that takes time. A lot of time. There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Sharon's ragged breathing, the sound of someone trying not to completely fall apart. I understand, she finally said. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't expect your help. I just wanted you to know that for the first time in my life, I am understanding what it means to really struggle, what it means to have no one to turn to. And it's terrifying, but it's also necessary. She hung up before I could reply. I kept holding the phone, looking at the screen that now showed the call duration. 8 minutes and 40 seconds. 8 minutes that had spoken more truth than years of previous conversations. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel satisfaction at seeing them suffer. I felt something more complex, more nuanced. It was relief mixed with sadness. It was strength mixed with pain. It was the certainty of having done the right thing, even though it hurt deeply. The following days passed in a strange stillness. I kept receiving sporadic updates, unrequested but not rejected. Joe and Lucy moved into the shared room. Robert got a temporary job in a warehouse, working night shifts for $11 an hour. Sharon continued cleaning houses in addition to her regular job. Between the two of them, they earned enough for food, for basic utilities, but not for the mortgage. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. They had 60 days to vacate the property. Sharon found a small one-bedroom apartment in a modest neighborhood. It cost $600 a month. It was all they could afford. They sold most of their furniture to gather the deposit. 3 weeks after that last conversation with Sharon, I received an unexpected call. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but this time I decided to answer. Mrs. Martin. It was a male voice, formal, professional. Yes, this is she. My name is Marcus Flores. I am a financial counselor. Your son Robert came to see me this week, seeking help organizing his finances. During our session, he mentioned what had happened between you. He asked permission to give you my number in case you wanted to speak with someone neutral about the situation. I was surprised. Robert had sought professional help. That was something he had never done before. And why are you calling me? Because part of my job is to help families rebuild not only their finances, but also their relationships, he explained. And because Robert authorized me to share something with you that I think you should know. I waited in silence. Your son cried throughout the first session, not because he had lost his house or his car. He cried because he understood, really understood for the first time, how much he had abused your generosity. He showed me the records of everything you had given him over the years, and he told me he had no idea it had been so much, that he had never added it up, that he had never seen the whole picture. I felt a knot form in my throat. We are working on a plan for him and Sharon to live within their real income. It's tight, very tight, but it's possible. And for the first time, he is committed to making it work without external help. Are you asking me to help him? I asked directly. No, Marcus replied firmly. In fact, I told Robert that the worst thing that could happen now would be for you to intervene and rescue the situation. I told him that this moment, as painful as it is his opportunity to grow, to learn, to become the man he needs to be. So why are you calling me? Because I also work with parents who have had to make difficult decisions like yours, and I know that even though it's the right thing to do, it doesn't stop hurting. I wanted you to know that your son is taking this seriously, that he is changing, and that someday, when the time is right, he will probably want to talk to you, not to ask for help, but to thank you for forcing him to wake up. We hung up after a few more minutes of conversation. I sat in front of this fireplace for a long time, processing what I had just heard. There was a part of me that wanted to believe Robert was truly changing, but there was another part, more cautious, that knew that true change takes time, that words are easy and actions are difficult. 2 more months passed. December arrived with its biting cold and short days. I stayed at the cabin practically the entire time, enjoying the solitude I had craved for so long. I read, I walked, I cooked, I slept. I lived without the constant weight of others' demands. And I discovered something surprising. I was happy, genuinely happy in a way I couldn't remember being in years. On Christmas Eve, as I prepared a simple dinner just for myself, the phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something made me answer. Mom. It was Robert. His voice sounded different, more mature, calmer. Robert, I said neutrally. I know you don't want to talk to me, and I completely understand, but it's Christmas, and I needed to call you, not to ask you for anything, just to tell you something. I waited. Thank you, he said simply. Thank you for doing what none of us had the courage to do. Thank you for forcing me to grow. Thank you for loving me enough to let me fall. I felt tears start to roll down my cheeks. Sharon and I are in the new apartment. It's small, but it's ours. Paid for with our money. I'm working 2 jobs now. She is too. We are tired all the time, but we are okay. And for the first time, I understand what you lived through all those years. The sacrifice, the effort, everything. I'm glad to hear that, I said with a trembling voice. I'm not calling to ask you to come back into my life, he continued. Not yet. I know I need to show you that the change is real, that it's not temporary. But I wanted you to know that I am trying, really. That's all I ever wanted, I said softly. For you to learn to rely on yourself, for you to become a responsible man. I know, Mum, and I'm going to achieve it, even if it takes years. After hanging up, I stared at the fire for a long time. I didn't know if Robert would really change. I didn't know if we could ever rebuild our relationship. But for the first time in a long time, I had hope. A cautious, protected hope, but hope nonetheless. 2 days later, I received a final message. It was from Sharon. Merry Christmas, Alice. Robert doesn't know I'm writing this to you. I just wanted to say that you were right about everything, and that if you can ever forgive us, we will be here, working hard to deserve that forgiveness. But if you can't, we understand that too. We wish you peace and happiness. You deserve it more than anyone. I read the message several times. Then I put it away without responding. Not because I was being cruel, but because I had nothing to say yet. Forgiveness, if it came, would come with time, with sustained actions, not with pretty words. I got up and walked to the window. Snow had begun to fall softly, covering the forest with a white, silent mantle. It was beautiful. It was peace. It was the world I had built for myself after decades of building worlds for others. I took out my phone and opened the settings. I checked the list of blocked numbers. Robert's was still there. My finger hovered over the option to unblock him, but I didn't do it. Not yet. Because true strength wasn't in unblocking the number. It wasn't in building bridges before they had proven themselves trustworthy again. True strength was in maintaining my boundaries, in protecting my peace, in not confusing love with enabling, in not sacrificing my dignity for the temporary comfort of pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. I put the phone away and returned to my chair by the fire. I picked up the book I had been reading and opened it to the marked page. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the fire crackled with warmth and light. And I, Alice Martin, 61 years old, was finally at peace. I had learned the most important lesson of all, that loving someone doesn't mean destroying yourself in the process, that being a mother doesn't mean being a martyr, that saying no, setting boundaries, protecting your space and your dignity is not selfishness. It is survival. It is self-respect. It is true love, the kind of love that teaches instead of enables, that strengthens instead of weakens. And if Robert ever came to my door, not with words, but with years of sustained change behind him, maybe we could talk. Maybe we could rebuild. But it would be on my terms, with my limits clearly established, with my dignity intact. Because this time, for the first time in my life, I was the priority. And that wasn't selfishness. That was justice. That was liberation. That was finally freedom.